This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
That's enough. Put down the mic.
On AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. We just spoke with Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano at the top of the hour. He had one perspective on what to do in response to the terrorist attack at the Pensacola Naval Air Station. We're going to be joined shortly by Major Cris Dosev, who has, I think, a different perspective on it. But first, Lucas and Wheaton, you're on Chicago's Morning Answer.
Hey, Dan, I just want to share my experience. During 9/11, I was stationed at Pearl Harbor, and when the attacks on the World Trade Center hit, it was a very surreal experience. The bases shut down immediately. It took forever to get on base. I think it took maybe a couple hours. If you left the base, you weren't allowed to come back on. The base went in complete lockdown, and in conjunction with what happened last week and the other incident at Pearl Harbor this past week, it has me really concerned as to how the Navy is going to pursue security force and accesses to the base in the future. I mean, the policies are probably going to go up, and all the postures are definitely going to go up, and it's going to make life a lot difficult for people.
Thanks for the call, Lucas. Interesting perspective. Yeah, I think that's one of the questions that's circling right now is on military bases where the dangers are increasingly coming from the inside,
right?
A la Fort Hood. Is there a policy change that should be considered by armed services, particularly naval air stations like Pensacola? For more on that topic, we're pleased to be joined by Major Cris Dosev. He trained at Pensacola and received his wings there in 1986. His son just finished training there, received his wings 4 months ago. And Cris is very active in local politics in Northwest Florida, too. He's also a friend of mine, but don't let that make you think less of him. Cris, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Amy. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Yeah, pleasure. So give us your perspective on, with respect to Pensacola. I mean, just maybe start there. First person perspective, having trained there, received your wings there, same with your son. And that, for those who don't know, sort of the cradle of aviation training, for the Navy, but for the world over.
Just to quickly summarize, this is the cradle of naval aviation. And what do we mean by that? Every single naval aviator, to include Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, has trained and received their wings starting at this program and starting in that very same building where a shooting occurred, Building 633. We're talking about legendary figures. In fact, just this November 22nd, we winged the 35,000th naval aviator. And we're talking folks like Butch O'Hare. We're talking about the men that fought at the Battle of Midway. All of these individuals received their wings starting at this program. So when I received my wings back in 1986 as a naval flight officer, just to let you know, when I had the duty, when I would be sitting at a desk like at 630 in that building 633, I would be armed with a 45, fully armed with extra capacity rounds there, so that everybody knew you were the duty and you were under arms. That's how it was back in 1984 through 1986. I think they changed the policies early on in the early 90s. My son just received his wings here this past July. He trained in that building because that's the initial staging area for for all practical purposes, what most people in the civilian world would call ground school, where you learn about engines, where you learn about aerodynamics, weather, navigation. That's where it all starts.
Wow. And then we find out that, FBI is saying, and the defense secretary, that one of his friends was filming this event. So this was obviously
horrendous.
Planned. Yeah, and that just is another punch in the gut because it's sickening. And then he had that party the night before, and still nobody turned him in. They were watching mass shooting videos.
There you go.
How does that happen? How do those kind of security breaches happen? Not just with the shooter, but also with the filmer, because you don't have cell phones during training. So how are they able to freely move about like that?
Well, here, first off, no, everybody's got a cell phone. Okay. Second, imagine this as a campus. For all practical purposes, this is almost like a college campus. In fact, this series of buildings If you recall that movie, Officer and a Gentleman, where they had
Sure.
the young men going through the AOC, that's where they used to have this,
We all fell in
right
love
in that
with
general
Richard
vicinity.
Gere.
Exactly. Well, that's where they used to have the Air Officer Candidate School. Okay, they no longer have it now. It's up in Newport, but that's a general area. So the students walk around this campus like as if they were on any say college campus, other than the fact that they're in full dress uniform, not dress, but the uniform of the day.
Mm-hmm.
They'll have phones with them. So, and they have vehicles. These are professional officers. So, you know what time you need to be, wherever it is you need to be. You attend your training. And at the end of the day, you go back to your residence, whether you're living on base or off base, and you study and prepare for the next day's events, So it's in that regard, a pretty casual setting. So anybody that has the military ID that's on active duty has access to the base. So they'll have vehicles with them and their cars. And to think that one of his colleagues was able to film this miscreant attack his fellow students is beyond comprehension. I'm incredulous. And just let me tell you this, that I support Senator Scott's request. I think this program needs to be terminated right here in Pensacola and in CONUS, in continental U.S., and I'm not saying that the program needs to be terminated so that we're no longer training officers of the Saudi Air Force. I'm saying that it needs to be moved to Saudi Arabia. And there's very specific reasons. Let me make it clear that I support our alliance with the Saudi Arabians. In fact, the reason I'm making this suggestion is because I don't want any diminishment of that alliance. I want to keep the alliance strong, and I think the most prudent thing to do is to avoid any future catastrophe. It would be in the best interest of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and it would be in the best interest of the United States going forward to secure this alliance by not allowing this to happen. Keep this in mind. Congressman Gates called for super vetting. Vetting is nonsense. We cannot effectively vet Saudi Arabians. Okay, that's absurd. We can't go back in their records and get into their minds and determine whether or not in the future they may self-radicalize. And that's exactly what happened here.
Well, but Chris, so we just talked to Jim Carafano, Lieutenant Colonel Carafano, about this. And one of the things he said is that he's shocked that the Saudis didn't vet this individual, didn't flag this individual, that they normally do a very good job of vetting their people so that something like this doesn't happen, because obviously it jeopardizes the whole program and the relationship, and they don't want that either. Is that a fair perspective?
No. Because anybody, so let's look at it from two perspectives. Let's say somebody's intent to execute a jihadi event. Okay, do you think he's going to be truthful when he's being not interrogated, but questioned? I don't think so. I think these people can cover that up very easily. But let's go to the other side and say that this guy had no intent whatsoever. Keep in mind, he was here for 2 years. Mm-hmm. Okay, so at any moment in time, if somebody has a grievance, somebody watches the wrong video, someone's introduced to the wrong imam, right? How often have we seen people become radicalized when everybody in their past said, oh, he was a wonderful son, a great kid. He used to help little old ladies walk across the street. And the next thing you know, he's strapping on a vest and blowing people up.
Well, but military personnel, they can't defend themselves because they have a ban on weapons in military bases. And the ones that are government issued have to go in this a special arms room. So do you think that they should allow people to carry?
I'm very glad you brought that up, Amy. First off, there are 16,000 or so military personnel in and out of this base. And there's, I think, another 9,000 people or 6,000 people that work on the base. But there are hundreds of Marines on this base at any given moment, close to 1,000, if not a little over. And like I said early on, as a Marine Corps second lieutenant, when I was there on duty, okay, I was under arms. That means that I carried a loaded .45 while on duty, okay? back then it was considered an open base. What I mean by that is that everybody in town, nearly anybody, could get on base just having to show an ID. They freely allowed people access on and off the base. That is not the case today. The case today is that it's a restricted base. If you have no business on the base, if you're not on active duty or a retiree, you don't have access to the base other than the rear entrance, which allows people very, very specifically to go to the Naval Aviation Museum and the lighthouse. Some say visitor centers that you could attend and go to. But otherwise, the rest of the base is closed to the public. So the fact that you have all these Marines who have been trained and understand weapons discipline, understand what it means to have to carry, and also understand what it means to have to use deadly force being, definition of if you are confronted with a situation where you have to put down the aggressor, you're applying deadly force. These Marines understand those concepts. And back in the day, Marines were armed. And Marines used to guard the gates, not only of Pensacola, but all Marine Corps air stations, Marine Corps bases, and naval bases. That is no longer the case. Keep in mind, and I don't want to diminish anything of the valiant efforts of the Escambia County Sheriff's Office. What they did that day was above and beyond. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. God bless them. But think about that for a moment. You have hundreds of Marines on base, and you have to rely on the local area sheriff's office to respond to an event on a military installation.
It does strike me as a bit counterintuitive, too, and I wonder if part of the conversation needs to be we have a military that is beset by political correctness, which is to say untruth, just as so much of the rest of the culture. And this is the cost of that. I mean, have we learned anything since Fort Hood, I guess is the question.
No, we have not. We have not. We are extending policies that are detrimental. At the end of the day, these are professional military officers. Could you imagine sending out police officers without weapons and just saying, hey, if something goes bad, get back to the station. We'll unlock the safe.
Yeah, right.
And then we'll unlock the other safe with some bullets. It's almost like Barney Fife-ish, to be quite honest with you. Here's your pistol, Barney, and put that bullet in your pocket kind of nonsense. So are these people professional military officers or aren't they?
So, Chris, you're in Pensacola, and I wonder what both the naval community there, the officer community there, as well as the larger community there is saying after what happened late last week.
I could tell you this, Dan. People are very upset, okay? And they are prepared to see the Saudis off. And again, let me reiterate and strongly emphasize, I fully support our military alliance, all right? I'm looking to do this to be prudent. I'm looking to avoid a future catastrophe. I understand fully, and so do all the other retired officers and active duty officers in this area, how important this alliance is to us in the Middle East. Okay. And I know there have been hundreds of officers that have come through this program from Saudi Arabia that have worked, very well with us, have worked overseas with us, have supported our cooperative mission in defending the Middle East. And I see that we have a strong future together. But this kind of thing is no longer tolerable to the American public. You can't live through the catastrophe of 9/11, where we lost 3,000 to what we know to be Wahhabi, Saudi jihadis, okay, 15 of the 19, and then to think that this man, for all practical purposes, lived, slept, and ate with his fellow students for the past 2 years, to turn a weapon upon an ally and allow this to happen. The parents, I'm a parent, right, of an individual, to think how proud these parents were to see their sons and daughters in uniform, to see them come here, entering into something, volunteering to something bigger than themselves, right, for the sake of the country, and anticipation of receiving whatever wings or finishing any school, the future honor and glory of these personal achievements, all robbed from them in a moment by this savage. That is no longer tolerable. I really, truly hope President Trump understands that, the gravity of that. This cannot happen again in the future. And one way to prevent it from happening is to have this program where it should be now in Saudi Arabia and no longer here in NAS Pensacola or wherever else. At NAS Whiting, they train the helicopter pilots there, but this no longer is tolerable.
He is Major Cris Dosev. He's a combat veteran, got his wings at Pensacola, so did his son. And he's still down in Pensacola, as you heard. Cris, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your perspective.
Thank you very much, Dan. Have a great day, Amy.
All right, thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.